The dare was simple. Walk the half-mile of track to the exact spot where the girl died. Do it at midnight. Do it alone. My friends, buzzing on the morbid energy of a tragedy that wasn't theirs, thought it was a ghost hunt, a cheap thrill. But the figure I met in that suffocating darkness wasn't a ghost, and what I found there, it wasn't a thrill. It was the crushing, silent weight of a truth that was way more terrifying than any spirit. It all started about 12 hours earlier, with a sound you never ever want to hear on a train. A violent, shuddering screech of metal grinding on metal. Then a sudden, brutal stop that sent coffee and people flying. We were stuck somewhere in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of anonymous green countryside. Then the rumors started, whispered down the aisles like a sickness. Someone was on the tracks. A girl, they said. A local girl. The wait stretched on for hours as a universe of flashing lights converged outside our windows. Police, paramedics, investigators. That whole chaotic, urgent dance that happens when someone's world has just ended, right beyond your line of sight. By the time they finally let us off at the next station, a tiny, one-building depot in a town that felt like it had been forgotten by time, the story had settled into a local tragedy. We were stranded. They said a bus would come in the morning. A few of us, a bunch of college kids on break, found the town's only bar. And that's where the locals, their faces grim but their voices steady, filled in the blanks. She was 16 years old. It happens sometimes, one man said, staring into his glass with this practiced empty look. He shrugged. The train is a part of life here, and sometimes a part of death. For them, it was just another sad, familiar story. For my friends, it was lore. It was an event. They started talking about the tracks, about ghosts, about the energy left behind. The air got thick with bravado, each one trying to prove they were braver than the next. Then, all eyes turned to me, the quiet one, the outsider. And the dare was born right there, out of their boredom and my silence. You should go see for yourself, one of them grinned. The challenge hanging in the air. See if she's still there. I really wanted to say no. I wanted to tell them it was disgusting that a family was grieving somewhere in this tiny town. But the pressure, that unspoken accusation of being a coward, it was like a current too strong to fight. So, I agreed. Midnight was dead quiet. The whole town was asleep behind dark windows, leaving me completely alone with the hum of the cicadas and the pounding in my chest. The tracks gleamed under a sliver of moon, just two silver lines stretching into nothing. Stepping onto that gravel felt like crossing into another world. Every crunch of my boots sounded deafeningly loud. The air smelled like creosote and damp earth, this weird industrial smell in the middle of nature. With every step, my mind started playing tricks on me. The wind whistling through the tall grass sounded like a whisper. A branch snapped in the woods, and I was sure it was a footstep right behind me. This is what I was supposed to feel, right? The thrill of being scared, the adrenaline. I thought about all the ghost stories we tell ourselves to make the world feel more interesting. But underneath that manufactured fear, a different feeling was starting to grow. A deep, profound sense of wrongness. I was walking on a stage. Just hours ago, this exact spot was the center of a storm of panic and grief. Now, it was just empty. The silence here felt heavier, somehow, weighted. I kept my eyes fixed on the spot the man at the bar had mentioned, where a road crossed the tracks. As I got closer, I could see the leftovers. Scuff marks in the dirt, a single, discarded latex glove, stark white against the dark ground. And it was there, about 50 yards from the crossing, that I first saw it. A shape, a dark, human-shaped silhouette standing perfectly still on the opposite rail, hunched over slightly, not moving at all. My blood went cold. Every horror movie, every campfire story I'd ever heard just screamed in my head. This was it. This was her. I was frozen solid, my feet feeling like they were cemented to the wooden ties. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I just stared, waiting for the thing to float, or turn, or do something terrifying. The figure didn't move for what felt like forever. The silence was stretched so thin I thought it was going to snap. I was bracing myself for a wail, or a flicker, or a ghostly charge. Instead, what broke the silence was a sound so mundane, so completely human, it shattered the whole illusion. A cough. A dry, rattling cough, followed by a quiet, frustrated sigh. Then, the figure moved. It didn't glide. It straightened up, slowly, like an old person does. It brought a hand to its back, arching, to relieve a cramp. The moonlight caught the motion, and the ghost became something real. An old man. He was wearing a flannel shirt and worn-out jeans. He wasn't a ghost. He was just a person. My fear didn't just disappear. It twisted into something else, a knot of shame and dread deep in my stomach. What was he doing here? Why was he standing on these tracks in the middle of the night? I watched as he bent down again and switched on a small, weak flashlight. Its beam cut a pathetic little circle on the gravel, sweeping back and forth. He was looking for something. I should have just turned back, crept away, and left him alone. But I couldn't. I was stuck there, held by a new kind of curiosity. Not the cheap, thrill-seeking kind that brought me out here, but a heavy, somber need to understand. I took a hesitant step forward. The gravel crunched. The man's head snapped up, the flashlight beam swinging wildly and blinding me. "Who's there?" he called out. His voice was thin but sharp. I'm sorry," I stammered, raising a hand. "I didn't mean to scare you." He kept the light on me, his face a mask of suspicion and pure exhaustion. I could see him clearly now, the deep lines around his eyes, a jaw tight with tension. He wasn't angry. He was just worn down to the bone. "What are you doing out here, son?" he asked, his voice rough. "I was just walking." I lied, and the real reason tasted like ash in my mouth. "Couldn't sleep." He stared at me for a long moment, and then his shoulders just seemed to sag, like all the fight had gone out of him. He clicked off the flashlight, plunging us back into the dark. "You shouldn't be here," he said. It wasn't a threat, just a fact. There's nothing left here but bad memories. My own shame pushed me to ask, "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked down at the tracks, at that empty space between the rails. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm looking for her necklace." The words just hung there in the cold air. "Her necklace. It was a little silver locket," he went on, his voice cracking, "shaped like a heart. Her grandma gave it to her for her 16th birthday. That was last week." He finally looked up at me, and in the dim moonlight, I could see the tears shining in his eyes. The raw, bottomless grief of a man who had lost his entire world. The girl from the train? This was her grandfather. The horror I came looking for, the made-up terror of a ghost story, felt like a pathetic joke compared to this. This was real horror. The horror of a grandfather on his hands and knees in the middle of the night, sifting through gravel, searching for one last, tiny piece of his granddaughter, because it was the only thing left he could do for her. He told me her name was Sarah. He talked about how she loved to draw, how she was saving up for a trip to the city, how she'd forgotten her jacket that morning and he'd almost called her back to get it. He wasn't being dramatic. It was just this quiet, painful list of everything he'd lost. He wasn't just looking for a locket. He was looking for a final connection, a final act of care in the very place she was torn away from him. I spent the next hour with him. I turned on my phone's flashlight, and we searched together. We didn't really talk anymore. What was there to say? The search was the only thing that made any sense. Two strangers, a guilt-ridden kid and a heartbroken old man, united in this ridiculous, desperate task. We never found the locket. At some point, he just stopped. He stood up straight and looked toward the east, where the sky was just starting to fade from black to a deep, bruised purple. "Thank you," he said, his voice heavy with the finality that told me it was over. "You should go. Get some rest." He turned and started walking, not toward the town, but down the tracks, away from everything. Just a lonely figure shrinking into the dawn. I watched until he was gone. The walk back to the station was different. The shadows weren't monsters anymore. The wind the infinite darknesis, the most haunting thing I will ever carry with me.